My daughter calls me at the same hour every night and asks, "Are you by yourself?" If I say yes, she hangs up. If I say no, she demands to know who's with me. Last night, I said I was alone. I never expected that lie to save my life. The phone call came at 8:47, same as it did every night. A precise, unyielding ritual that had become the metronome of my evenings. Lily's face would appear on my screen, a perfect, worried miniature of her father's. Her voice, still high and sweet at 10 years old, would ask the same question. "Are you by yourself, Mommy?" It was a script we'd been performing for 6 months, ever since David died and his mother, Eleanor, had tightened her grip around our lives, turning concern into a velvet-lined vice. Tonight, for the first time, I was not by myself. Marcus, my sponsor, sat in the wing-back chair across from me, his presence a quiet, solid anchor in the storm of my grief. He was sipping tea, the steam curling around his weathered face. He'd come over because the anniversary was approaching, and he knew the pull of old ghosts could be strong. I looked at Lily's image, her brow furrowed. The question hung in the air, weighted with an unspoken dread I couldn't decipher but felt in my bones. If I said no, she would demand to know who was with me, her voice sharp with an anxiety that was far too old for her. Eleanor would have coached her, of course. It was all part of the narrative she was spinning, that I was unstable, fragile, a recovering addict who couldn't be trusted alone with her own child. That I was entertaining strangers, falling back into old habits. Every no was a data point for Eleanor's case against me, but every yes brought its own strange consequence. If I said yes, that I was alone, Lily would simply say, "Okay, Mommy, I love you," and the line would go dead. The silence that followed was always more terrifying than the interrogation. It felt like I'd passed a test, but had no idea what the stakes were. Tonight, I looked at Marcus, his calm eyes meeting mine, and a rebellious, exhausted spark ignited in my chest. I was tired of the tests. I was tired of the scrutiny. I was tired of my daughter being used as a pawn in her grandmother's suffocating game of control. So I lied. "Yes, sweetie," I said, forcing a brightness into my voice that felt like swallowing glass. "I'm all by myself, just reading a book." Marcus raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He understood the intricate dance of family manipulation better than anyone. He'd lived it himself. "Okay, Mommy." Lily's voice was small, relieved. "I love you." And then, the click. The screen went dark. The silence descended, but this time it felt different. Colder, heavier. I put the phone down on the coffee table, my hand trembling slightly. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said to Marcus, my voice barely a whisper. "It's her. Eleanor. She's turned Lily into her little informant." Marcus set his mug down. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Clara. That's not a phone call. That's a daily psychological evaluation administered by a 10-year-old. It's cruel." He was right. It was cruel. To both of us. He stood up, stretching his back. "I should probably head out. Let you get some rest." I nodded, though the thought of being truly alone now filled me with a fresh wave of anxiety. As he walked toward the hall closet to get his coat, we heard it. The soft, metallic scrape of a key in the front door lock. My blood ran cold. I froze, my eyes wide, fixed on the door. It wasn't my key. I only had one, and it was on the hook by the door. David's was somewhere, lost in the shuffle after his death. The only other person with a key was Eleanor. She'd insisted, for emergencies. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Marcus stopped dead in the hallway, his back to me, hidden from the entryway by the angle of the wall. He caught my eye, his expression hardening, and put a single finger to his lips. He didn't move. He just stood there, a silent, unseen sentinel in the shadows of the hall. The door swung open without a knock. Eleanor stood on the threshold, silhouetted against the dying light of the porch lamp. She was dressed in her usual immaculate black, a mourning dove turned predator. She didn't look surprised to see the lights on. She looked expectant. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft, definitive click that echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence of the room. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as her son's, scanned the living room, taking in the single teacup on the table next to me, the book lying open on my lap. She smiled, a thin, satisfied curve of her lips that never reached her eyes. It was the smile of a chess player who had just cornered the queen. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice a low, syrupy purr. "I was just passing by. I saw the lights on and worried." I'm so glad you're alone. The words hit me like a physical blow. Glad you're alone. My lie. My stupid, impulsive lie. It hadn't been a rebellion. It had been a signal. It had been permission. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. The phone call. The question. The lie. Her arrival. This was a coordinated maneuver. My breath hitched in my throat. From the corner of my eye, I saw Marcus remain perfectly still in the shadowed hallway. He hadn't been seen. Eleanor glided further into the room, her movements fluid and unnervingly confident. She placed her expensive leather handbag on the dining table, and from it, she withdrew a small, velvet-lined box. Not a jewelry box, a medical kit. My stomach plummeted. She opened it. Inside, nestled on the dark velvet, was a glass vial of clear liquid and a hypodermic syringe. "You've been looking so tired lately, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she drew the liquid into the syringe, tapping the side with a practiced, clinical motion. "So much stress, the grief. It's all been too much for you. I think it's time you had a proper rest." The air in my lungs turned to ice. This wasn't a wellness check. This wasn't an impromptu visit. This was something else entirely. Something monstrous. "Eleanor, what is that? What are you doing?" My voice was a choked, ragged thing. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like they were filled with sand. Fear had paralyzed me. She laughed, a low, guttural sound that was utterly devoid of humor. "Oh, please, Clara. Let's not pretend. You've been struggling. Everyone can see it. Slipping. It was only a matter of time before you relapsed completely. A tragedy, of course, but not an unexpected one." She held the syringe up to the light, a single drop of clear liquid beating at the tip of the needle. "This will just help the process along. A little push. When they find you, it will all make sense. The grieving widow, the recovering addict, succumbing to her demons. It's a sad story, but a believable one. And then Lily will finally be safe. With me, where she belongs." The confession hung in the air, audacious and chilling. It was all there. The months of whispers to family members about my fragility. The constant monitoring. The way she'd isolated me from David's side of the family, painting me as possessive and unstable. It wasn't concern. It was a campaign. She was methodically, patiently building my cage, and now she was here to lock the door. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated terror, a second, more horrifying realization dawned. David. His sudden heart attack. The doctors had called it a fluke, a tragedy of genetics. But he'd been so healthy. He'd complained of being tired, dizzy, for weeks. The same way I'd been feeling lately. "David," I breathed, the name catching in my throat. "It was you." Eleanor's smile widened, a grotesque slash in her pale face. She looked proud. "My son was a good man, but he was weak. He chose you. An addict. He tied our family's legacy, our family's money, to someone with your history." I warned him. I told him you would be the end of him. When he wouldn't listen, I had to protect my granddaughter. The trust. Everything he worked for. It all goes to Lily, of course, but it needs a proper administrator. A stable one. She took a step toward me, the syringe held like a weapon. He was just the first mistake that needed correcting. Now, it's time to correct the second. My entire world fractured. The grief I held for my husband, a raw, open wound, was suddenly poisoned with the knowledge that he hadn't just died. He had been stolen, murdered, by his own mother, and I was next. The plan was perfect in its cruelty. She had spent months laying the groundwork, convincing everyone I was on the verge of a relapse. A small dose of whatever was in that syringe, something that would mimic an overdose, and her story would be complete. The trap had been sprung. My lie had told her the path was clear. But the path wasn't clear. Just as she lunged toward me, a dark shape exploded from the hallway. Marcus moved with a speed that defied his age. In 2 long strides, he was between us. He grabbed Eleanor's wrist, his grip like iron. The syringe clattered to the hardwood floor. Eleanor screamed, a sound of pure shock and fury. Her mask of calm superiority shattered, revealing the writhing, ugly thing beneath. "Who are you? Get out of my house!" she shrieked, struggling against his hold. "It's not your house," Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her to her knees. He was a man who had seen the worst of the world in his years as a paramedic, and he was not intimidated. "Clara, Call 911. Now. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling, slick with a cold sweat. I could barely see the screen through the tears that were now streaming down my face. I stabbed at the numbers, my breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. The dispatcher's voice was a lifeline in an ocean of horror. As I choked out my address, telling them my mother-in-law had broken in and tried to attack me, Eleanor continued to scream, her words a venomous torrent of denials and accusations. She's lying. She's a junkie. He's her dealer. Check her arms. She's high right now. The police arrived in minutes, their flashing blue and red lights painting the living room in surreal, strobing colors. They separated us immediately. Eleanor, weeping hysterically now, played the victim to perfection. The concerned grandmother, attacked by her unstable daughter-in-law and a strange man. But her story fell apart quickly. The key she'd used to enter my house, the syringe on the floor, and Marcus, a calm, credible witness with no reason to lie, who had heard every single word of her chilling confession. He recounted it to the officers with methodical precision, his voice never wavering. They took her away. I watched from my doorway as they placed my husband's mother, his murderer, into the back of a police car. Her eyes met mine through the window, and they were filled with a hatred so pure, so absolute, it felt like it could burn the world down. There was no remorse, no fear. Only fury that her perfect plan had been ruined by a lie and a ghost in the hallway. I collapsed against the doorframe, the adrenaline leaving my body in a dizzying rush, and finally allowed myself to break. The sobs that racked my body weren't just for my own terror, but for David, for the life that had been stolen from him, and for the horrifying truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. My rock bottom hadn't been in a bottle. It had been in my own living room, at the hands of my own family. And the long, grueling climb back to the light was just beginning. The next morning, the world felt both muted and painfully sharp. The flashing lights were gone, but their ghost images still flickered behind my eyelids. The house was quiet, but the echo of Eleanor's confession seemed to vibrate in the walls. Marcus had stayed until the early hours, making sure I was settled, making tea I couldn't drink, and talking to the detectives who had come to take my formal statement. His presence was the only thing that kept me from shattering into a million pieces. When he finally left, promising to call in a few hours, the true weight of it all descended upon me. I was alone in a crime scene that was also my home. My first call wasn't to a friend or family member. It was to a name Marcus had given me, scribbled on a napkin. Melinda Davies, a criminal lawyer who specialized in domestic cases. I dialed the number with a hand that still trembled. Her voice was professional, clipped, but not unkind. I stumbled through the story, the words feeling foreign and absurd as I said them out loud. My mother-in-law. She confessed to murdering my husband. She tried to kill me. She had a syringe. It sounded like the plot of a lurid television movie, not my life. Miss Davies didn't sound surprised. She just listened, occasionally interjecting with a sharp, clarifying question. Was the syringe recovered? Was your sponsor present for the entire confession? Did she state her motive? I answered in a monotone, a strange, detached part of my brain taking over. Yes. Yes. To get custody of my daughter and control of the family trust. By the end of the call, she had agreed to meet me that afternoon. Do not speak to anyone else about this, Clara, she warned, her tone firm. Not the police, not your family, no one. From now on, I speak for you, and do not touch anything in that room. The police will be back for a more thorough sweep. My second call was harder. It was to my sister, Sarah. I had to tell someone. I needed an anchor in my own bloodline, someone to remind me I wasn't completely alone in the world. But as I explained what happened, her reaction wasn't the unequivocal support I craved. It was hesitant, confused. Clara, are you sure? Eleanor? It sounds so crazy. Are you feeling okay? You've been under so much stress. The words, so similar to the ones Eleanor had used, were like a slap in the face. The poison had worked. The narrative Eleanor had so carefully crafted for months had taken root. In that moment, I understood the true scope of the battle ahead. It wasn't just against Eleanor. It was against the web of lies she had woven around me. A web that had ensnared the people I should have been able to count on. I'm not crazy, Sarah, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. And I'm not using. A monster has been living in our family, and I'm just the first one to see her face. I ended the call, a cold resolve settling in my gut. I was on my own. That afternoon, I met Melinda Davies. She was a small woman with an iron gray bob and eyes that seemed to see right through to the bone. Her office was sparse, organized, and overlooked the city. It felt like a war room. We sat at a polished table, and for 2 hours, I told her everything. Not just about the night before, but everything that had led up to it. I started from the beginning, from when I first met David. I talked about my recovery, how I had been sober for 5 years when we married. I talked about Eleanor's initial coolness, her subtle digs, the way she would offer me a glass of wine at family dinners with a "just one won't hurt, dear" smile, even though she knew my history. I recounted the small, insidious moments of gaslighting, the times she'd helped by rearranging my kitchen, then feigned surprise when I couldn't find anything. The way she'd tell me David had said something critical about me, only for him to deny it later, leaving me feeling confused and paranoid. After Lily was born, it escalated. She questioned my every parenting decision. She'd drop by unannounced and check the baby monitor, the temperature of the nursery, the contents of the diaper pail, her critiques always couched in the language of loving concern. As I spoke, Miss Davies took meticulous notes on a yellow legal pad. She didn't interrupt. She just let the torrent of memories, the years of accumulated slights and manipulations, pour out of me. When I finally got to David's death, my voice broke. I told her about his symptoms in the weeks leading up to it. The fatigue, the mild confusion, the occasional dizzy spells. He'd gone to the doctor, who had run some tests and found nothing conclusive, chalking it up to stress. Eleanor had been so attentive during that time, always bringing him special teas and homemade broths to build up his strength. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to stop and take a deep breath. She was poisoning him, I whispered, the reality of it hitting me with fresh force. Slowly, so it would look natural. Miss Davies looked up from her notepad, her expression grim. It's a classic methodology for a certain type of killer. Patient, intimate, hard to detect without a specific reason to look for it. She tapped her pen on the pad. Okay, Clara. Here's what we're going to do. The district attorney's office will handle the criminal case against her for the attempted murder charge. Our primary role there is to support them and make sure your rights as a victim are protected. But we are also going to launch our own investigation. We need to build a case for David's murder, and we need to protect you and your daughter. The word murder, spoken so clinically in the sterile office, made it real. This was my new reality. I wasn't just a grieving widow. I was the survivor of an attempted murder, and the key witness in the murder of my husband. The first step was a restraining order. Miss Davies filed it that same day, a thick document that legally barred Eleanor from coming within 500 feet of me or Lily. Next came the evidence. I want you to go home, she instructed, and I want you to become an archaeologist of your own life. I want every text message, every email, every voicemail from her, for the last 5 years. I want you to write down every single interaction you can remember that felt wrong, strange, or manipulative. Dates, times, locations, who was there. Don't filter. Don't second-guess yourself. Write it all down. This is your timeline. It will become our roadmap. That night, I began. I sat at my dining room table, the same table where Eleanor had calmly unpacked her tools of murder, and I started digging. I scrolled through years of text messages, and a sickening pattern emerged. Her messages were a masterclass in manipulation. Just checking in, dear. Lily mentioned you seemed a bit off today. Hope you're not letting things get to you. I brought over some groceries. You looked too tired to shop. Don't worry, I used my key. Didn't want to wake you if you were napping. Are you sure that's a good idea, Clara? David always said you were impulsive. I found emails where she'd written to other family members, copies she'd accidentally sent to me. I'm so worried about Clara. She's trying her best, but the strain is showing. I fear she might be leaning on old crutches. It was all there. A breadcrumb trail of character assassination. I printed everything, the stack of paper growing into a damning monument of her deceit. I wrote until my hands cramped, filling a notebook with memories I had suppressed or dismissed. The time I was sure I'd paid a bill, only for it to be overdue, and Eleanor mentioning she'd seen the notice in the mail pile and forgotten to give it to me. The time my car keys went missing right before a crucial job interview, only to reappear in my coat pocket days later, a pocket I was certain I'd checked a dozen times. Each incident, on its own, was small, annoying, plausibly deniable, but together, they formed a suffocating tapestry of psychological warfare. While I compiled the past, My support network began to solidify. Small but strong. Marcus called every day. He connected me with a therapist, Dr. Anya Sharma, a specialist in trauma and abuse. My first session with her was raw. I felt like a bundle of exposed nerves. She didn't offer platitudes. She gave me tools. Grounding techniques for when the panic set in, breathing exercises. She gave me a name for what I had experienced: ambient abuse. A slow, steady drip of manipulation designed to erode a person's sanity and self-worth. And then there was Uncle Robert, David's uncle, his father's younger brother. He called me 3 days after Eleanor's arrest. He was a quiet, reserved man I'd never known well, but his voice on the phone was resolute. "I never trusted her, Clara," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Not since my brother died. There was always something cold in her, something grasping. I'm so sorry I never said anything. Whatever you need, I'm here. My wife and I, we're on your side." 100%. His words were a balm on my wounded spirit. Validation. It was the one thing I desperately needed, and it came from the most unexpected corner of the family. This was my new life. A triangle of support. My lawyer, my therapist, my sponsor. My days became a routine of meetings, documentation, and therapy sessions. I was no longer just a mother or a widow. I was a plaintiff, a witness, a survivor. I was building a fortress, brick by painful brick, preparing for the war that Eleanor, even from behind bars, was about to wage. Eleanor did not stay behind bars for long. She had money, the kind of old, entrenched family money that buys the best legal defense imaginable. She was released on a multi-million-dollar bond within a week. Her freedom secured by a man named Julian Croft, a defense attorney with a reputation for being as brilliant as he was ruthless. The restraining order kept her physically away, but her presence was a constant, oppressive weight. The war began not with a bang, but with a flood of paper. The first salvo from Croft's office was a motion to have me declared an unreliable witness. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, a legal document that read like a novel written by a vindictive ghost. It detailed my history with addiction in lurid, exaggerated detail. It painted me as a gold digger who had trapped a man from a wealthy family. It suggested that David's death had pushed me over the edge, into a state of paranoid delusion where I was fabricating wild accusations against his grieving mother. Every lie Eleanor had ever told about me, every seed of doubt she had ever planted, was now blooming in the fertile ground of a legal filing. They twisted my sobriety against me. My regular attendance at recovery meetings was framed not as a sign of strength and commitment, but as proof of my ongoing instability. Marcus, my sponsor, was described as a known associate from the addict community. His credibility questioned. His motives painted as suspect. They even filed a motion demanding access to my therapy records with Dr. Sharma, claiming they were essential to understanding my deteriorating mental state. Miss Davies was furious, but not surprised. "This is the playbook, Clara," she said, her voice tight with anger as we sat in her office, the thick document on the table between us. "It's called Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender. They are going to try to put you on trial. Our job is to not let them." We fought the motion to release my therapy records, and we won. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. It was a line in the sand. The next attack was more personal. It came through the family. My phone started ringing with calls from David's cousins, his aunts. They had all been fed the same script by Eleanor and her lawyers. "Clara, we know you're hurting, but this has gone too far. You're dragging the family name through the mud. Think of Lily. What will this do to her?" They were enablers, acting as Eleanor's proxies, applying the emotional pressure she no longer could directly. The worst was a call from David's sister, Chloe. We had once been close, or so I had thought. Her voice was thick with tears. "How can you do this to our mother, Clara? After all she's done for you? She's a wreck. She loves Lily more than anything. She's offered a truce. She's willing to set up a new trust. Just for you and Lily. A generous one. All you have to do is tell the police you were mistaken, that you were confused and grieving. A bribe. A multi-million-dollar offer to recant my story, to let my husband's murderer walk free. The audacity of it, the sheer cold-blooded calculus, left me breathless. She killed your brother, Chloe," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "She tried to kill me. There is no amount of money in the world that can buy my silence." I hung up and blocked her number. Then I blocked every number from David's side of the family, except for Uncle Robert's. The drawbridge was up. The fortress was sealed. The financial pressure was immense. Eleanor, as the executor of David's will, had frozen all of our joint assets, claiming they were part of a contested estate. The money I had relied on for the mortgage, for bills, for Lily's school, was suddenly gone. I was hemorrhaging money on legal fees, fighting for my life and my sanity, while the woman who had tried to murder me was using my own husband's fortune to fund her defense and starve me out. It was a strategic, brutal siege. This was my rock-bottom crisis. A few months into the legal battle, I was emotionally exhausted, financially drained, and completely isolated from the family I had married into. The constant stress was a physical weight, pressing down on me day and night. The urge to numb the pain, to find solace in the old, familiar poison of a bottle, was a constant, seductive whisper in the back of my mind. One night, after a particularly grueling day of depositions where Croft's team had grilled me for hours about every mistake I had ever made in my life, I found myself standing in the liquor aisle of the grocery store. My hands were trembling. My heart was pounding. It would be so easy. One drink, a moment of quiet, a moment of escape from the relentless assault. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the colorful bottles blurring through my tears. I thought of Lily, her worried face on the phone screen. I thought of David, of the justice he deserved. And I thought of Eleanor, of the triumphant smile on her face if I were to fail. That thought, the image of her victory, was what saved me. It was a splash of ice water, a jolt of pure, clarifying rage. I would not give her the satisfaction. I would not become the person she had accused me of being. I turned, abandoned my cart in the middle of the aisle, and walked out of the store. I drove straight to a meeting, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I sat in the back, a wreck, and just listened. And when it was my turn to share, I said, "My name is Clara, and I'm an alcoholic. And today, I didn't drink." The room erupted in applause, a wave of support from strangers that felt more real and more powerful than any family tie I had lost. I had survived the siege. I had held the line. The legal process moved at a glacial pace, a slow, grinding machine that seemed designed to wear you down. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. It was a world of paperwork, motions, and continuances. But beneath the surface of the tedious legal maneuvering, Detective Miller, the lead investigator on the case, and Miss Davies' own private investigator were quietly and methodically building their case. One of the first, and most gruesome, procedural steps was petitioning the court to exhume David's body. It was a horrific necessity. Miss Davies explained it to me with gentle gravity. "The medical examiner didn't look for poisons then, Clara, because there was no reason to. His death was ruled a heart attack. To prove murder, we need to prove he was poisoned. This is the only way." I signed the papers in a daze, the thought of disturbing my husband's final resting place making me feel physically ill. But I knew she was right. It was a necessary desecration in the pursuit of truth. The process took weeks. More paperwork, more waiting. The day it happened, I stayed home, holding Lily close, trying to shield her from the grim reality of what was happening. I just imagined a quiet, dignified process. But the local news got wind of it. The image of a backhoe at my husband's gravesite was on the evening news, a stark, public spectacle of my private nightmare. Eleanor's lawyer immediately issued a statement, decrying the ghoulish and desperate act of a disturbed woman, which serves only to desecrate the memory of a beloved son. They were experts at spinning every move we made into an act of insanity. While we waited for the toxicology results, the investigation pushed forward on other fronts. Detective Miller executed a search warrant on Eleanor's house. It was a long shot. She was far too meticulous to leave a trail of evidence lying around. But they did find something interesting. In her meticulously organized office, they found extensive financial records. It turned out Eleanor had been systematically embezzling money from the family trust for years, long before David's death. She had been diverting funds into offshore accounts, hiding assets, and creating a secret financial empire. Her motive wasn't just about control, it was about pure, unadulterated greed. She wasn't just trying to protect the family fortune, she was actively stealing it. This discovery was a significant blow to her defense. It established a clear, financial motive that went beyond a grandmother's concern. It painted a picture of a cold, calculating woman driven by avarice. Miss Davies was pleased. "This is good," she said. "It makes the story we're telling make sense to a jury. It's not just about some abstract notion of control. It's about money. Everyone understands money. Then came the breakthrough. The evidentiary turning point that changed everything. The toxicology reports from David's autopsy came back. My hands shook as I opened the email from Miss Davies containing the summary. I had to read the words 3 times for them to sink in. They had found it. Traces of a rare, difficult-to-detect poison derived from a plant. A substance that, administered in small, regular doses over time, would cause symptoms consistent with cardiac distress, eventually leading to a fatal heart attack. And it was the exact same substance that was found in the liquid from the syringe Eleanor had tried to use on me. I let out a sound that was half sob, half scream of vindication. It was real. It wasn't in my head. I wasn't crazy. I had been telling the truth all along. The physical proof was finally there, cold and clinical and undeniable. That report transformed the case. The district attorney's office immediately added a charge of first-degree murder to Eleanor's indictment. This discovery sent shockwaves through the family. The narrative of the unstable, grieving widow began to crumble. A few of the relatives who had shunned me reached out with tentative, shame-faced apologies. I didn't respond. It was too little, too late. The lines had been drawn months ago. But the most important development came from an unlikely source. Detective Miller's team had been digging into Eleanor's past, looking for any other strange illnesses or deaths in her circle. They found a former home health nurse who had cared for Eleanor's own husband, David's father, before he had died of a similar sudden illness years ago. The nurse, a woman named Agnes, had quit her job abruptly and moved out of state. It took the investigators weeks to track her down. At first, she was terrified to talk, but faced with the new evidence in David's case and offered immunity from prosecution, she finally told her story. Agnes confessed that Eleanor had offered her a substantial amount of money to administer special vitamins to her husband. Agnes had suspected something was wrong and refused. She quit without giving a reason, too scared of Eleanor to report her suspicions. She had lived with the guilt for years. Her testimony was explosive. It established a pattern of behavior. It showed that David wasn't her first victim. With this new evidence, Miss Davies and the assistant district attorney, Mr. Henderson, had to make some strategic decisions. They had a mountain of evidence, but a trial is a performance. They had to present a clear, compelling narrative. We focus on the things we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, Miss Davies explained to me in a strategy meeting. The poison, the syringe, the confession witnessed by Marcus, the financial motive, the testimony from the nurse. We don't need to get into every instance of gaslighting over the last 10 years. That can muddy the waters and make you seem vindictive. We stick to the core crimes, the murder of your husband and the attempted murder of you. It was a difficult decision. Part of me wanted to stand up in court and detail every single act of psychological torture, every lie, every manipulation. I wanted the world to know the full extent of her cruelty. But I trusted Miss Davies. This wasn't about airing all my grievances. It was about securing a conviction. It was about making sure that Eleanor could never harm anyone again. The trial date was set. After more than a year of fighting, of living in a state of suspended animation, I was finally going to face my monster in a court of law. The day the trial began, I walked into the courtroom feeling like a soldier heading into battle. The air was thick with a tense, formal silence, broken only by the rustle of papers and quiet coughs. The room was all polished wood and cold marble, imposing and impersonal. Eleanor was already seated at the defense table next to Julian Croft. She was dressed in a conservative navy blue suit, her hair perfectly coiffed. She looked like a grieving matriarch, a pillar of the community, not a murderer. She turned her head and her eyes met mine. There was no flicker of emotion in them. It was like looking at a shark, cold, empty, and predatory. I took my seat behind the prosecution's table, next to Miss Davies and Mr. Henderson, and focused on my breathing, just as Dr. Sharma had taught me. In, out. Anchor yourself in the present. You are safe here. The first few days were a blur of jury selection and opening statements. Mr. Henderson laid out the prosecution's case with methodical clarity, a roadmap of Eleanor's greed and cruelty. Then Julian Croft stood up. His voice was smooth, resonant, and persuasive. He painted a tragic portrait of a devoted grandmother, tormented by her unstable, drug-addicted daughter-in-law. He told the jury that this case was not about murder, but about a custody battle that had spun out of control, a desperate woman's attempt to frame her mother-in-law to gain control of the family fortune. He looked directly at me as he said it, his eyes filled with a kind of theatrical pity. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, the jury, the press, the public. I felt them judging me, weighing my past against his words. The character assassination was now being performed on the grandest stage of all. The prosecution built its case, piece by damning piece. The first responders testified about the scene they found at my house. The forensic chemist explained, in excruciating detail, the properties of the poison found in David's system and in the syringe. The financial investigator walked the jury through the complex web of offshore accounts and embezzled funds. With each witness, the foundation of Eleanor's lies began to crack. Then, it was Marcus's turn. He walked to the witness stand, his presence calm and authoritative. He recounted the events of that night, his voice steady. He repeated Eleanor's confession, word for word. She said, "He was just the first mistake that needed correcting. Now, it's time to correct the second." Hearing those words spoken in the solemn quiet of the courtroom sent a fresh chill down my spine. Croft's cross-examination was brutal. He came at Marcus with everything he had. He brought up Marcus's own history of addiction from decades ago. He tried to frame him as a co-conspirator, my accomplice in a bizarre plot. "So, you, a man from this recovery community, just happened to be in the house at that exact moment? What a remarkable coincidence." But Marcus was unflappable. "It's not a coincidence that a friend supports another friend on a tough anniversary, Mr. Croft. It's called fellowship. You might want to look it up." He never lost his composure. He was a rock. Finally, it was my turn. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked to the stand. I could feel Eleanor's eyes burning into me. I sat down, my hands trembling in my lap. I smoothed down my skirt and looked at Mr. Henderson, avoiding the jury, avoiding her. He started gently, taking me through my relationship with David, my recovery, the birth of Lily. Then he led me to the night of the attack. My voice was shaky at first, but as I recounted the events, a strange calm settled over me. I was just telling the truth. It was that simple. When he finished, it was Croft's turn. He approached the stand like a predator circling its prey. For the next 4 hours, he subjected me to a relentless, merciless assault. He twisted my words. He brought up every painful detail of my past, every mistake I had ever made before I got sober. He read from the private journals the police had taken as evidence, quoting my own moments of doubt and grief and using them as proof of my instability. "You write here. Sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy." "Were you in fact going crazy, Mrs. Miller?" he asked, his voice dripping with insinuation. I took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Sharma's words. "Don't engage with the distortion, just state the fact." I was grieving the murder of my husband and being systematically gaslighted by his killer. I said, my voice clear and steady. "I believe that would be a tremendous strain on anyone's mental health." He tried to portray my lie to Lily on the phone as proof of my duplicity. "So you admit you lied to your own daughter just moments before this alleged attack?" "I told a lie that unexpectedly saved my life and exposed a murderer," I replied, looking directly at the jury for the first time. I saw a flicker of something in their eyes. Understanding. He hammered on my fear of relapse, on my financial dependence on David, on my supposed jealousy of Eleanor's relationship with Lily. It was a verbal flaying. He was trying to provoke me, to make me break down and cry, to become the hysterical, unstable woman he had described to the jury. I gripped the sides of the witness stand, my knuckles white. I focused on a spot on the back wall. I breathed. I answered the questions. I did not give him the satisfaction of my tears. I would not cry here. I would not break here. When it was finally over, I felt hollowed out, but I had survived. I had told my story. I had held my ground. The final pieces of the trial fell into place. The nurse, Agnes, gave her damning testimony about Eleanor's first attempt at murder. The prosecution rested. The defense presented a weak case, mostly character witnesses for Eleanor who spoke of her charity work and community standing. Eleanor herself did not take the stand. Croft knew she would be destroyed on cross-examination. Then came the closing arguments. Mr. Henderson was masterful. He wove all the threads of evidence together into an undeniable tapestry of guilt. He held up the syringe, sealed in an evidence bag. He pointed to Eleanor. "This is not a grieving grandmother," he said, his voice ringing through the courtroom. "This is a predator who hides behind a veil of privilege and Chanel. She killed her son for money. And she was going to kill the mother of her grandchild for the same reason." Croft's closing was equally dramatic, a final, desperate attempt to create reasonable doubt. He called the prosecution's case a fantastical story, built on the testimony of a discredited addict and her equally compromised sponsor. He pleaded with the jury to see the real victim in the room, the elderly woman whose life had been ruined by a malicious lie. And then, it was over. The judge gave his instructions, and the jury filed out. The waiting began. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. I sat in a small waiting room with Miss Davies and Marcus. We didn't talk much. There was nothing left to say. The entire story of my life for the past 2 years had been laid bare, and now 12 strangers held my future, my daughter's future, and the memory of my husband, in their hands. After a day and a half of deliberations, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom. The air was electric. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't dare look at Eleanor. I stared at the jury as they entered, trying to read their faces, but they were impassive, unreadable. The foreman, a middle-aged man with a tired face, handed a piece of paper to the bailiff, who gave it to the judge. The judge read it, his expression unchanging. He handed it back to the foreman. On the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find the defendant? The clerk asked. The foreman cleared his throat. We find the defendant, Eleanor Miller, guilty. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush, and I sagged in my chair, my knees suddenly weak. Miss. Davies put a firm, steadying hand on my arm. On the charge of attempted murder. How do you find the defendant? Guilty. On the charge of embezzlement. The foreman continued down the list of financial crimes. Guilty. 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 They had believed me. After everything, they had seen the truth. I finally looked at Eleanor. Her face was a mask of utter disbelief, her mouth slightly agape. The mask cracked, and for the first time, I saw it. Fear. The cold reptilian predator was finally cornered. Julian Croft put a hand on her shoulder, whispering in her ear, but she seemed not to hear him. She just stared into the middle distance, her perfect world collapsing around her. The victory was overwhelming, but it was not clean. It was bittersweet. The verdict couldn't bring David back. It couldn't erase the years of manipulation or the trauma of the trial. It couldn't undo the poison Eleanor had poured into my family. Justice had been served, but the wounds remained. The sentence came a few weeks later. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. She would die behind bars. It was the most the system could do, and it was enough. It had to be. In the aftermath of the trial, the silence was deafening. The constant hum of anxiety and preparation that had been my background noise for nearly 2 years was gone. The war was over, but I was left standing in the ruins of my old life, tasked with the monumental job of building a new one. My first session with Dr. Sharma after the sentencing was a strange mix of relief and emptiness. It's over, I said, the words feeling hollow. So why don't I feel happy? You've been in survival mode for a very long time. Clara, she explained gently. Your body and mind have been flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. You've been focused on a single, clear objective: win the fight. Now that the fight is over, you're left with the wreckage. The grief you never had a chance to fully process for David. The trauma of the attack. The betrayal. The healing isn't a single event, like a verdict. It's a process. She was right. The verdict was a form of justice, but it wasn't a cure. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of a much longer, quieter one. The chapter of recovery. I had to learn how to live without a dragon to slay. I had to learn how to simply live. The first practical step was selling the house. It was a beautiful home, the place where David and I had brought Lily home from the hospital, but its walls held too many ghosts. Every corner held a memory now tainted by the truth. The living room was a permanent crime scene in my mind. The front door was a symbol of violation. Uncle Robert helped me with the process, handling the realtors and the paperwork, shielding me from the stress. We found a small house in a new town, an hour away, a place with no history, a blank slate. Rebuilding my life was a slow, deliberate process. I continued with my therapy, learning to manage the PTSD that lingered. Loud noises made me jump. I had trouble trusting people. But slowly, with Dr. Sharma's guidance, I began to reclaim my own mind. I continued going to my recovery meetings, my sobriety, the bedrock on which I was building this new life. It was the one promise I had made to myself that I had never broken, and its importance felt more profound than ever. I found a part-time job at a local library, a quiet, peaceful place surrounded by stories, a world away from courtrooms and legal documents. The most difficult and most necessary part of this new beginning was establishing permanent boundaries. The verdict had shaken the family, and many of the relatives who had sided with Eleanor tried to reach out. They sent letters, emails, text messages, all filled with apologies and excuses. We just couldn't believe she was capable. We were manipulated too. I read them, and I felt a flicker of pity, but no desire for reconciliation. Their betrayal, their willingness to believe the worst of me when I was at my most vulnerable, had severed the tie. I wrote one final, collective email to all of them, with the help of Miss Davies to make sure it was clear and legally sound. I told them that while I understood their position, the damage was done, and for the well-being of myself and my daughter, I needed to move forward without them in our lives. I wished them peace, but I made it clear that the door was closed. It was a final act of self-preservation, a declaration of independence from the toxic dynasty I had married into. Uncle Robert was the only exception. He and his wife became Lily's surrogate grandparents, a source of quiet, unconditional love and support. Lily was the center of my new universe. She was resilient, more than I could have ever hoped. We talked, with the help of a child therapist, about what had happened, in age-appropriate ways. We called it Grandma Eleanor's sickness, a sickness of the mind that made her tell lies and hurt people. Lily accepted it with a child's simple, profound wisdom. She missed the grandmother she thought she had, but she was safe, and she felt it. Our new life was quieter, smaller, but it was ours. It was authentic, and it was safe. One evening, about a year after we had moved, Lily and I were in the kitchen of our new house, making dinner. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow through the window. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was 8:47. We both looked at it. For a moment, the old muscle memory of anxiety clenched in my stomach, a ghost of the old ritual. Lily walked over to the phone. She looked at the screen, then looked at me, a small, knowing smile on her face. She pressed the power button and the screen went dark. "We don't have to answer that anymore, Mommy," she said. Tears welled in my eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. "No, sweetie," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We don't." I pulled her into a hug, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. The scars were still there, pale, silvery lines on my soul. They would always be a part of me, a reminder of the darkness I had walked through. But they were just that, scars. They were not open wounds. I stood there, holding my daughter, in our small, safe kitchen, bathed in the light of the setting sun, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we were finally, truly, free. The silence that followed was not empty or terrifying. It was peaceful. It was the sound of a new beginning. It was the sound of home,